Is your team not performing well? Is morale low and turnover high? Are you falling further behind the competition? I'm here to help. I'm your host, Shani, and this is the Leadership Show, where business strategy and culture finally meet, and we make the long-awaited shift from rhetoric to results. I promise I'm not your typical boring leadership consultant, and I will help you get your shift together. Let's do this. Hello, Leadershifters, and welcome to another episode of the Leadershifters Show with Shani. It is my pleasure to introduce to you today's guest, Julian Roberts, who's joining us from across the pond in the United Kingdom. And Julian is a fellow executive and leadership coach. And one of the things I really appreciate about him is he is also a fellow irreverent communicator. So, for example, on his website, in his about page, he says, sort of the clean version is, I coach high-performing leaders, athletes, and teams with extreme ambitions. But then he goes on to say, I will encourage you, challenge your bullshit, and push you to go beyond what you believe is possible. Why go for gold when you can go for platinum? I won't judge you, but I am straight talking and will hold you to account. My coaching is not for the faint-hearted, it's for the lion-hearted. So we're going to delve into how that became his approach. And without further ado, Julian, say hello to the Leadershifter audience.
Oh, well, thank you, Shani, for this invitation. It's great to see you, and great to see you on the other side, so to speak, because you came on my podcast some time ago.
That's right. That's right.
It's great, actually. And thanks for having us. Really a pleasure.
Yeah. I mean, I had such a great time on your podcast and loved what you had to say in that conversation that I had to invite you onto my podcast.
And it's brilliant. And what I love about you, it's just good conversation and stimulating and engaging conversation, and that's what it's about, isn't it? That's what podcasts are about.
Absolutely. Two great minds with thought leadership on leadership and executive coaching coming together. 1 + 1 doesn't equal 3, it equals 300.
Let's hope so, anyway.
All right, so let's get into it. I mentioned that you're irreverent, which I so appreciate because I also use 4-letter words and love to push people beyond their comfort zones. And sometimes that takes, a little irreverence and some humor peppered in with the challenge. So I'm curious how that came to be part of the style in your wheelhouse. There's got to be a story.
I guess I've always been fairly straight talking and fairly blunt, and I don't know if you know that the UK, we've got what you call the north of England, the northerners. I'm a northerner. I was born in the north, and we're fairly straight talking, down to earth, very grounded, and in some ways it's a really good thing, and in other ways it can be a real bad thing. And it's interesting because I live now in the south of England, and I suppose I've probably modified a little bit in some sense. But I've always had this ability to see stuff very clearly and then be very direct. And that can be good. And obviously, when you're talking to people, you have to modify to different styles. I use DISC as well as a psychometric tool and help people that, I'm a high D. So when I meet high Ds, you've probably got some D in you as well there. You can just you can just talk to people. And it's interesting. Some people observe me. My wife's the almost opposite. And when she sees me interact with a high D, she says, you seem very rude to each other. You just say it how it is and just get on with it and crack on. And so I am very direct. But, with that comes, within a coaching context, it's not all about being direct. There is a sensitivity, there is an approach, and it is understanding people's styles. But I think people who I've coached, whether that's individuals or teams, appreciate that directness. And I do use humor sometimes to sort of call people out. I don't come along with a stick and say, oh, that's not very good, and all that accountability piece. But I just do a little smirk and say, "Oh, do you really mean that? Or are you really going to do that?" And I just do a little bit of humor that sort of nicely softens it, but is direct, and then they can feel it like, "Oh, he's calling me out on something." So that's my approach. I've always been like that, and it took me a while probably to get to that place within coaching, because when you go into the coaching world, you sort of, I came from a sales background, which was very much, very focused, very much about knowing what you're going to say in a call and a session, your objectives and everything else. And obviously coaching's not like that really, but initially I was very much like that, very trying to keep it in control, but it's not about being in control in a coaching session. It's allowing it to flow, allowing the wisdom to flow and the insights to come and see what shows up. And that's what I love about it now is, I turn up into a session and it's like, what's going to show up today? Yes, they've got some goals and objectives clearly, but today, the moment, right now, what shows up, that is what we're going to go with. That's what we're going to work on. That's what the subconscious wants to tell us to develop with. And that's what I do. And I go with the flow with that. Yeah.
And sometimes it's our intuition or reading body language and facial expressions that don't match what people are saying that causes our bullshit meter to go up, and to name that with clients and cause them to question the stories they have in their head or the mask that they might feel that they have to wear. So it's actually a very powerful coaching skill. I agree. And I just want to pause for a second. You referred to both of us as high D, and for those of you watching or listening, that's a reference to the D in the DISC behavioral model. And both Julian and I use that with individuals and teams to help them get a handle around not only their own style, but those around them in their sphere of influence, whether that's direct reports, colleagues, customers, family members, because it helps people communicate more effectively when they understand other people's styles. D is for directness or dominance. I is for influence, meaning how do you influence when you're around groups of people. S is for steadiness, which is how you respond to change. If you're high S, it's not that you can't deal with change, it's just that in the face of change, you need it to be delivered at a pace with which you can adopt it, and with clear instructions about how to adapt to the change. And then C is for compliance, how you respond to rules and regulations. So someone who's a high C loves to dot the I's, cross the T's, do lots of research, etc. So just wanted to take a time out and explain it. It's a great tool. You can ask us about it. Okay, so one of the things that I appreciate about you is you have done some research to validate some of the concepts that are popular in the leadership zeitgeist today, if you will. And resilience is obviously a topic, even more so since the pandemic. We have Zoom fatigue and burnout and all those things. So talk to me about the research you did on resilience and what the key takeaways were.
Well, I'm in the middle of doing some research with my thesis, which is all about authentic leadership and team resilience. So it's an area where I love to lead and help people to sort of lead in the authentic leadership way. So it's an area I'm quite interested in, and also the team resilience piece. Because I think with what I found with the pandemic, as much as I've been talking a lot about sort of resilience, there's been a lot of stuff on personal resilience, which is obviously great as individuals, but less on team resilience and how to build that sort of team resilience. So I'm, I say, in the middle of that in terms of working through that with my thesis on my psychology masters. So as yet to understand how that correlates. And my gut feeling at the moment that, the higher, more authentic leadership there is, the more it will sort of create a relationship with team resilience. Because I think, like anything in any organization, the leadership has such an impact. And, and I think leadership has an impact on resilience, has an impact on innovation, has an impact on performance, the whole piece. And I think it's then trying to optimize that, and how do we build that and take those insights and then bring it to the forefront and start to bring that into organizations. Because, you know, resilience is here to stay. It's not just a trendy little word that's been talked about a lot in the last couple of years. Clearly, I know, but it's been around for many years, and it's a thing to talk about how to create resilient organizations. Because I think, you know, often people think if you get a lot of resilient individuals together and put them together, unfortunately the sum of the parts are not greater. In fact, sometimes it's less, and it's a weird interaction, because often people think if I get 10 resilient individuals, put them together to be a resilient team. It doesn't work that way. You've almost got to build that resilient team as a separate entity, really. Yes, it helps if you've got people in that mindset, understanding of resilience, but you still got to build almost that resilient muscle as a team. And that's what I'm sort of looking to, I guess, explore more and understand more.
Got it. And do you have any recommendations in the meantime until you finish the research, things that you've seen work either with your clients or even experimenting with your thesis?
Yeah, I mean, resilience is, you know, the simple definition is that ability to bounce back, isn't it? You get a challenge, you get an issue, you get a trauma, you get a pandemic, whatever it is, small, big, whatever it is. And it's that ability to bounce back. But it's also, and in some ways that's probably a very inadequate definition, because I think it's more than that. Because often people fall down when they face a challenge, and then they get back up. And sometimes that can just be grit and determination. But before you get back up, the key thing is all about learning and understanding and reflecting why I got knocked down in the first place. And that to me is what resilience is about, is that ability to learn. And sort of taking that sort of premise, really, it's teams that have that ability to learn, you know, to get a challenge or something that knocks them sideways. Okay, how do we sort of manage that? How do we understand that? And to create an environment where you challenge and you learn and create that vulnerability, you've got to create a sort of psychological safe environment. And that's, you know, it comes back to that, to me, is a real key core plank of high team performance is psychological safety, where every individual can contribute, feel they can contribute. They can push the boundaries in terms of innovation, because if you're going to be resilient, you've got to come up with new ideas, you've got to come up with new approaches to get around it, but willing to almost step out, but also willing to, it may go wrong, it may fail, because any new innovation, any boundary push, things happen. They don't always happen, do they? They sometimes fail or don't go quite right. But having that ability that you're not going to be chastised for that, you're not going to be sacked for that, you feel safe, you feel comfortable. And with there comes that psychological safety also, is that ability for a team to learn together as well. So to me, that's where I've started to learn more about that building of resilience. And there's other ways of doing that, you know, in terms of, you know, making sure you as a team are open on when things do go wrong. How do you debrief? How do you understand what happened? How do we take those true learnings and then incorporate them, change them, and put them into new processes, new ways of working? And they're the fundamentals. So it's as simple as, you know, before you get back up from a challenge, you learn, and it's just creating processes for learning and then moving forward and allowing that sort of a sense of mindset, really, to think, okay, how can we move forward on this and go forward? Yeah.
I love that. You know, we do in our biz talk a lot about failing forward, which is all about learning from it as opposed to harping on what went wrong, what the mistake was, what the failure was, because there is no failure. We succeed or we learn, right? And what you're saying, and I want leadership just to listen up right now, is it's up to you as leaders to facilitate that discussion, not in a perfunctory way, but in a really detailed way. So take the debrief seriously. Don't just touch upon it for 5 minutes in a team meeting. Like, it should be a dedicated meeting in terms of, okay, here's what happened, here's what worked about it. Let's not just focus on what didn't work. And then, yeah, what were the learnings from the mistake or the failure or what have you? And don't leave it there, right? What Julian's saying is then action plan. Okay, how do we want to incorporate that going forward for our next project, in our policies and procedures, in our innovation frameworks, etc. Because it doesn't mean anything if we just talk about it. We have to put it into action. So yeah, thank you for that.
I'll give you an example. I mean, I've been coaching a team of ladies who have been looking to row around Great Britain to break a world record, and been building this team to make them sort of very resilient. And they had they did a weekend as part of the training, like 4 or 5 days training of rowing in the sea, you know, overnight sleeping and everything else. And then they sort of sandbanked somewhere and had to be rescued by the lifeboat, which obviously was quite an epic thing for them, and unfortunate for that. And I remember them coming to a session, they felt real failures. They felt this sense of, we've messed up and everything else. And firstly I said, well, let's just reframe that word failure for sake of thing. Not that and I said, let's reframe it as feedback. And I said, let's then think about what feedback or learning can you get from that? And then we went around the room and we obviously talked about what happened clearly. And we almost used the session as a debrief, but also a way of building this resilience. I said, what did you learn from that? What would you do differently next time? And then they started, and the learnings were amazing from all of them, and they all inputted and shared. And then they said, okay, well, let's put that down as what you won't do next time. This is what you'll do instead. And it just created a learning opportunity. And they went, I don't know, we spent the whole evening on that. So, you know, that's it. That's coaching, that's facilitation, that's helping you learn and making you more resilient. Because next time you won't get in that situation because you've learned. So you don't see it as a mistake or as a failure, but actually as a learning. But the key thing and all this is learn from it. Otherwise you will carry on. If you don't learn from it, you will do it again. That is just stupidity. I mean, that's being stupid.
Yeah, that reminds me of another famous quote. The only failure is the failure to learn.
Yes, totally. No, it is so true. So true.
Yeah. I think I might have the title of the podcast now, Reframing Failure as Feedback with Julian Roberts.
Yes. Well, no, it's interesting. I use reframing as a thing all the time, you know, in terms of any opportunity to look at things differently, you know, and is to reframe it, you know, just look for the silver lining, look for the opportunity, and just do a reframe on it instead of something being, you know, my wife does lots of Ironman sort of races, and sometimes she does like half Ironman races, and she'll go during the race, well, at least I'm not doing a full Ironman, I'm just doing a half. And so she's just done a reframe and just gone and just minimize what she's doing, not in her sense of it doesn't matter, but from her system, her body, it's like, well, it's only a half, isn't it? No big deal. I do big ones already. And that's a reframe. And it just changes you and your mindsets, and it creates such different perspectives and different energy in how you go forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And it's the healthy thing to do for resilience too, is like, don't stay stuck in the, oh, I shoulda, coulda, woulda. It's like, okay, well, what did I do? And right, what is the silver lining about this? Because we create our own misery if we choose to.
Yes, and there is always something. There is always some silver lining. I mean, sometimes it takes a while to find it, but there is always something where you think, in this badness and horribleness. And I remember talking to a business owner today about pandemic, and they lost a lot of business, but actually they've come out with various things that they wouldn't have done previously because it made them stop and think. They've got into e-commerce, they've got into franchising, they've got a whole host of stuff, and they're actually probably in a stronger position now than they probably were 2 years ago before the pandemic. And actually the pandemic created that opportunity of time and space to think, even though they weren't making any money at that point. And so that's the silver lining, and that made them more resilient and more sustainable as well.
Absolutely. I mean, what the workplace looks like is changed pretty much forever as a result of the pandemic.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to pivot now to another topic, which is leadership growth hacks. I know there are some things that you recommend, and who doesn't like a shortcut or an easy way to accomplish something that might otherwise seem complex? So what are a couple of the growth hacks that you recommend to your clients?
Growth hacks. I mean, I have a real passion for unlocking not only just potential in individuals, but also potential in teams. And I think there's some ways of doing that. And I say some simple ways. Nothing's ever simple. It's simple to say it, simple to, but to execute it is a little bit more difficult in terms of that. So, but I do a lot about unlocking potential, and obviously I do that with my team coaching, but also I help leaders do that with. And the first thing is making sure you have the right mindsets for your, I guess, your team to sort of buy into things and sort of create that opportunity. And this goes a little bit about this whole piece of reframing, but if you have the right mindset that you've got a team that's got potential, firstly, just by thinking that will create opportunities, because you think, actually, I think this team's got potential to grow, potential to do great things. Suddenly you'll start to look for them, see them, and they'll start to open up, and those conversations will start to happen. And with that, making sure that you create that, I suppose, environment that is open and transparent, and people can start to see who you are, your authenticity, and that starts to create an environment where actually will create the right mindset for people to start to really go for it. So that's one aspect, is the mindset piece, and that goes for, I suppose, a lot of things in life. Really, it's just tuning that mindset. And I'm not all about, it's not all about positive thinking, because I don't really believe in positive thinking as such. I talk about more about the just having the right approach. You know, it's just like when you meet somebody and you have an intent to help them. If I have an intent to help you, Shani, my mindset to do that, I will help you, and you'll feel that as well. And I'll look for opportunities to think how I can help you in that conversation, whatever it may be, refer you, actually talk to you about something to help you there, or bring other people involved. But if I just have an intent just to get what I want to get out of it, as in just selfishly want to get some money out of it, you'll feel that, but also it just comes narrow-minded, because it just comes one-dimensional. And I think with leaders, it's making sure you have the right approach, that it's actually, I'm here to serve this individual, I'm here to get the best out of them, because actually if I get them to unlock their potential in my team, my capacity increases, my team does well, and therefore by virtue of all that, I do well. And so it's just flipping it a little bit. And so I concentrate a lot of that about having that right mindset in how you develop and bring your team to life.
Right. It reminds me of an article I read recently where someone just, we talk a lot about servant leadership, which in general is what you're talking about. And this article illuminated like what's the opposite of that in a way that really resonated for me, which is egoic leadership. And that's what you're describing from, am I helping someone from a selfish standpoint for the sole purpose of getting what I want, as opposed to serving the greater good, the mission, vision, values, customer needs, etc. And so for any of you who are operating by virtue of ego, not because you're a bad person, it's just out of habit, and maybe that was the leadership model that you've always worked under, so it just is natural to you, really pause and consider what your motivations are in leadership and pivot or reframe that mindset to, how can I do this from a servant leadership mindset? Because your interest gets served too, right? If everybody wins, you win.
Totally. And another thing to help with that, really, I've talked to a lot of leaders who have not struggled with the concept of servant leadership at all, but it's more, they just can't get into that groove. And I go back to getting them some clarity and understanding of their purpose. And if you get a right understanding of your purpose usually is bigger than you. It's usually far more than just you having a great impact, or you doing a good job and being successful, there's usually some sort of humanity in it. It's usually about helping others. It's usually beyond you when you get knocks of it, and I help people get to their purpose, do a lot of that stuff with leaders. And so if you focus on how can I, serve my purpose, then actually you're coming from a place of centrality of who you are. But also, if you're locked into your purpose, it will go bigger than you, and that people again will feel that, and therefore actually you ultimately end up serving people because of the nature of your purpose tends to do that anyway. So I think that to me is quite helpful, really, and it takes it a bit bigger. Then it takes like some massive thing rather than thinking I have to tactically be a servant in my leadership. Actually, no, I just want to serve my purpose, and by default you'll create that environment that will help others, and you'll empower others and everything else, because the only way to fulfill a purpose is to get other people on board and to empower them anyway, because it's bigger than you, far bigger than you.
Right. I love that. Serve your purpose. And I don't want to go down this rabbit hole because it would be a topic for a whole other podcast, but research shows that living a life that is purposeful according to, your identity and your humanity is one of the keys to happiness.
It is, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. We're both certified in DISC and some other coaching modalities and approaches. There's one that I'm not certified in that I'm very interested in, and you are certified. So I want to ask you about NLP, or neuro-linguistic programming. So first, explain to leadershifters what it is, and then how do you incorporate that into realizing the potential for your individual and team clients?
Yeah, I find NLP a powerful tool as part of what I do as a coach. In essence, and simplistically, it's a way of using language to rewire people, as simplistically as it is. So it's using language and words and to realign neurons and everything else in your system, and that's probably the level I'll go to at this point. Probably be helpful, but it's really powerful, and it's understanding the power of words in that sense as well, and how words can be used. And there's a number of things I use it for, and helping people get different perspectives. And just on the, an example, there's a technique I use when I help people with either creating more understanding of a situation or conflict, and it's a tool called perceptual positioning, and it's a fabulous tool through NLP. And you get people to, it's a bit weird when you do it with people because they find it a bit weird at first, but actually it's really powerful. They almost come from their own perspective of a situation, then they go into the perspective of the other person who's perhaps having a conflict, and then they do this thing called fly on the wall, where you sort of slightly get out of the situation. And then I do this other thing I call it a drone view, so you're going even higher up. And it's almost one of the things as I'm explaining, people don't know it sounds a bit strange and weird, but when you go through the process, it's so powerful. I had one executive who he had this conflict with his boss. And it's interesting, when we're in the conversation, 2 or 3 things popped in my head thinking what he should do, but obviously didn't share that. And then we did this process. He was a little bit cynical about it, and wasn't sure about it. He went through the process, and at the end of it, he came up with, he said, "This has been amazing." So he had 4 action points at the end of it, things I'd never even thought of, to be honest. And all the insight he gleaned was incredible through this process. And he then went off, implemented it, came back and said, "My relationship is far better than it was before." And that was a wonderful tool there as well. And then there's things like, you've probably heard about anchoring, and I don't do all the tapping of people because that's just a bit weird and slightly inappropriate in some ways. But I do what you call conversational anchoring, where, and this is helpful sometimes, say somebody has, I suppose, lacking confidence in presenting, for example. You then say to them, "Okay, tell me a time when you feel very confident." And it could be, when I go skiing down a black run, I feel alive, all these sort of things. So you get them to describe it. And then what you do is you bring that that when they feel very confident in the conversation, aligning it to the situation of presenting. And so you're almost overlapping the words, and what you're doing is you're taking those feelings where they feel excited and confident and then you're overlapping that scenario, which is the presenting, and you're almost merging them and starting to put them on the same tracks. And so what happens then, so when they get to that situation, instead of feeling nervous, anxious and everything else, they get to stand, in front of the lectern or whatever it is, and suddenly they feel excited, full of confidence, because they've merged the feelings, the same feelings as going down a ski run or whatever it is. So that's a great example. So it's things like that, and it's powerful, and I use various aspects depending on what it is, and it's great for sort of reframing as well in terms of scenarios.
Great. And leaders, you don't necessarily have to be trained and certified in NLP to use those best practices. Just being a leader coach, you can ask questions like, when's a time when you felt confident? Describe it, and help them incorporate that into what is causing them a lack of confidence or wherever they're stuck. And of course, asking the cliche, like put yourself in the other person's shoes. I think we forget to do that. And so as a leader, if you can prompt people to think about that, that takes away, sort of the knee-jerk reaction to conflict and gets them to think more broadly about, the other dynamics of the situation, and can often soften their point of view. So yeah, 2 leadership questions that you can ask, modeling NLP without needing to be an NLP expert.
Totally, absolutely, yes.
Good. So since you are also a podcast host, and I want to mention the name of your podcast, it's Helping Organizations Thrive with Julian Roberts. And as we talked about earlier, I was a guest recently, and I'm curious to know, besides me, who has been one of your most compelling guests? Just kind of want to hear what the takeaways were, what the topic and takeaways were.
It was a young lady called Jasmine Harrison, and she's 22 years old now, but she's the youngest solo rower to go across the Atlantic at the age of 21.
Wow.
Which in itself is just amazing. And the reason I love those sort of extreme type of people who do some amazing things. I just think it's just absolutely amazing. So
sure.
But the fact that she's 21 years old, solo rode 71 days it took her, and it's just awesome. So it was the reason I really enjoyed that conversation is it was just having that understanding of that story of how she got there, the challenges, the fact that she'd capsized twice, the fact that she'd woke up at 4 a.m. once and this big tanker was heading in towards her. And that was interesting as well, because what the things was all about was trying to get some lessons in resilience, when people facing difficult situations. Mm-hmm. She certainly put herself in difficult situations. And she did something interesting actually, which was a real something I know about, a thing called metacognition. And it's where she woke up with this alarm going off on a boat, and there was this tanker heading towards her. I don't know how far away it was, but it was, I don't think it'd seen her. And so obviously she got onto the radio to sort of say, I'm here. And obviously a big tanker can't really slow down that quickly, because they're that big and she's very little. And so they can't really move neither. So she said, whenever things happen, I'll video myself so I could share it for other people to see what was going on. And so this is where she didn't realize she was doing it. This is where the power of what you call metacognition is. She almost became the third person. So actually because she was filming herself, she then became the third person, which then created this different perspective. It's almost like a NLP point of view. She just suddenly became out of herself. And that, she said to me, I was really calm. I was really calm, and I just kept looking on myself, and I was just doing this commentary of what was happening, what I need to do next. And I was as cool as a cucumber, she says, because she did this metacognition, this sort of almost stepping out of yourself and going through it. And she went through the whole process, managed to get the people on board to slightly move, and she had to move a little bit, and it did come quite close, about within 50 meters. And she had to be careful of the wash from the wake from the water. But that was an amazing learning of a real thing that she didn't know what she was doing. And it's a lesson for us all, really, sometimes in situations, almost to step back and almost do a narration of that scenario actually will bring calm, because you take yourself out, therefore your amygdala, who's going crazy, is now gone into more logic, because it's gone all a bit like thinking about things, and because it's not as involved, it's not as engrossed, not engrossed in the feelings. And so, yeah, that was amazing, powerful story, but also a lesson for us all about situations which can be really quite traumatic.
Well, that really resonates for me, because I had a situation like that late last year. I was rock climbing, and I kind of got stuck in a precarious situation by accident. Of course, I wouldn't have purposely put myself in it. And contrary to what anyone would have expected, including me, I was also cool as a cucumber, and I was troubleshooting in a very calm, rational way, along with my rock climbing partner, how to safely get down. And I would have expected that I'd freak out and have knots in my stomach. And instead of that, I was like, okay. So I love that there's a name for that.
Yeah, it is. It's a little metacognition. It's literally almost being the third person in essence.
Yeah, excellent. Well, Julian, this has been a fantastic conversation, and I want to ask you to tell us how folks can reach you or learn more.
Yeah, well, yeah, thanks for having us on, Shana. Really appreciate this. Best way is either through my website, which is julianrobertsconsulting.com, or if you go to LinkedIn and just type in my name, Julian Roberts, you'll find me there. It looks something like this. I'm sure you'll leave some links around, but yeah, I'm happy to connect with people on LinkedIn as well. So yeah,
absolutely, there will be links in the show notes for sure. So just to summarize some of the key points, leadership shifters, if you weren't taking notes like I was, team resilience equally as important as individual resilience. In fact, the sum of the parts does not equal the whole if we're not also focusing on team resilience, which is all about learning from failures and any other situations that bring people down, in full debrief, with full honesty, full transparency, and safety to be able to process them and put them into action. As part of that, leadership hack, if you will, but of course still related to resilience, is having the right mindset to help your team reach its potential, which is more than just positive thinking. So for those of you who are like, oh, I'm not going to be Pollyanna about this, that's not what it's about. It's about having a constructive mindset, as opposed to, which is a servant leader mindset, as opposed to a mindset driven by ego. And the NLP tools that we discuss are ways that we can help our people be resilient and change their mindsets. And again, you don't have to be certified in NLP. Just those couple of questions that I posed as we were having the conversation would be really helpful. So, Julian, thanks again for joining us today. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you, Shani. Really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
All right. Till next time, leader shifters.